Hello, everybody. Welcome out to Sac Metro's at-home worship service. We're glad you could join us today. Here is the scenario. You're holding a cup of coffee when someone comes along and bumps into you or shakes your arm, and it makes you spill your coffee everywhere. Here is the question. Why did you spill the coffee? Well, you say, because somebody bumped into me or they shook my arm. It forced me to spill my coffee. But that is the wrong answer. You spilled coffee because there was coffee in your cup. The same would have happened if you had tea in your cup. You would have spilled tea. Whatever is in the cup will spill out. The same could be said for our spiritual life. If you get rattled in life, whatever's inside of you will come out. Therefore, when life does come along and bump into you or shakes you up a little bit, which will happen, whatever is inside of you will come out. It's easy for us to fake it. It's easy for us to look like we're all got it together. Everything's good. We're cool. We're calm. We're collected until you get rattled. Until the pressure comes along, starts squeezing you a bit, frustrations continue to mount, and eventually, whatever's inside of you is going to come out. And we've got to ask ourselves, what is in our cup? What's inside of us? What's in us spiritually? So when life gets rough, what's going to spill out? Life provides the cup, but not what's inside it. You get to decide what you fill it with. Based on the book of Acts, Paul was a Roman citizen. He was from a Jewish family, born in Tarsus. Tarsus was a trade city in the Mediterranean. It was located in Asia Minor. It was an influential trade sector since Alexander the Great. Paul was trained up as a Pharisee. Acts 23:6 described Paul as a Pharisee and the son of a Pharisee. At some point in Paul's life, Paul studied under a great Pharisaical teacher by the name of Gamaliel. Gamaliel was considered one of the greatest teachers in Jewish history. Many believe that Gamaliel was also the grandson of Hillel the Elder. Hillel the Elder was also known as one of the great sages of their society, one of the great teachers. And they believe that they might have even, been, like I said, grandson of Hillel. So Paul studied under one of the most respected teaching lineages in the late Second Temple period. And he seems to have been educated far beyond what the Torah was, even far beyond Torah expertise. It included his deep understanding of the prophets into classical literature and philosophy. He was also known to speak several languages and had in-depth knowledges of other societies around him, as well as he had an incredible passion for God and persecuted the followers of Jesus even to their death. Let me ask you a question. If you accidentally bumped into Saul, then now Paul, if you accidentally bumped into Paul during that stage of his life, what would come out of him? Well, it depends on who you are and what day you met him, maybe. But maybe he would give you some deep, historical context of God, or maybe an in-depth hermeneutics on the Torah. Maybe he would talk to you about the lineage of those that he's studying under. Maybe he could tell you about the prophecies of the Jews we're waiting to see fulfilled. But if he knew you were a Christian, what would probably come out of him was maybe something like murderous threats, or maybe even worse. It just really depends on who you were and what kind of a mood he was in when you met him. Much could be said for us. If we are not around our church friends and we're driving down the street and somebody cuts us off, maybe we're not saying, "Bless you, my child. Drive on safely and be prosperous." We might be like, why would you do that? If we're being honest with our lives, we have to see that sometimes we don't always exude what we're hoping to contain on the inside of us, which honestly tells us that there's still some areas in us that are not made completely holy and set apart for Jesus. Everybody at some point will be shaken. The question is, what will come out of your cup? What's going to come out when you are shaken? We decide what spills out of our cups. And we decide what we're going to focus on and what priorities we make in our lives. And eventually, whatever we are leaning towards, it will show. Whether you decide to chase the American dream or whether you decide to be a philanthropist. Whatever you put your hope and your focus in, whatever you chase after, those things will eventually show through in your character, in your outward expressions that other people experience. I want to talk first about Paul's decision here. In 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 2, we get to see a defining moment in Paul's life. It's a simple glimpse into his soul, but it helps us to see really what was in Paul's cup after he met Jesus. 1 Corinthians 2:2 says this, "For I have made a decision, I have decided to know nothing among you except Jesus Christ and Him crucified." What Paul is essentially saying is I've made a decision that I'm not going to spend my life contemplating or considering all of the knowledge, all of the information, all the education, everything that I've learned in my life. Even under the best teachers, the best scholars, I'm not even going to consider it. In fact, all of those things that I've learned now, they're nothing. They're nothing to me. They hold no value compared to what I now know because of Jesus Christ and the cross. Paul's saying, I've made up my mind. I'm not going to live for those things any longer. I'm going to spend the rest of my life considering, immersing myself in, and obsessing over Jesus, over the decision Jesus made for me to go to the cross for me, His enemy. We all need to make decisions. What are you going to live for? What are you going to die for? When we don't, when we die, we're going to be known for something. When I die, I don't want to be known for my political persuasions, right? Oh, he believed in this, or he voted for this, or he fought for that. I don't want to be known for any political persuasions in my life. I don't want to be known for some invention. That would be great to invent something. I don't want to be known for an invention. I don't want to be known for an organization that I built. I don't want to be known for anything physical that I could have done. I don't want to be known for a song that I sang or for a book that I've written. I don't want to be known for those types of things. When I die, I want to be known as a man that loved Jesus, that made sacrifices based on that love, that followed Him even when it was uncomfortable. I want to be known for loving Jesus. How do you want to be known? I want to be known as a man that preached the cross of Christ. I want to be a man that took his free time and tried to teach others. I want to be known for my love for Jesus and the acts of service and the love that comes behind that. I want to be known in Jesus. A man who lived because of the cross. A man that found direction because of the cross. A man that loved deeper than I used to because of the cross. I want to die. I want to die on the hill of Calvary. And what that means to me is I want my life to be the same purpose and have the same direction that Jesus' life had. I want my life to end on the cross. I want my life to end serving Jesus down to my last breath. encouraging the brothers, building up people, loving others, teaching them, demonstrating what God has demonstrated to me. You know, if you died today, what would you be known for? Would you be known for your love for Jesus? Would you be known for your job, for your career, for your accomplishments, for your family? What would you be known for? You know, when Jesus was hanging on the cross, the Bible tells us that there was only one of his 12 apostles that was there at the foot of the cross. You know, some scholars believe that the others were probably there, or maybe some of them came and went, but the Bible just didn't say that they were there, and that's possible. In John chapter 19, verse 25 through 27, it says this: "Near the cross of Jesus stood his mother's sister, Mary the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus saw his mother there and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby." Let's stop right there. You know, the only disciple out of the 12 apostles that the Bible has a record of being there while Jesus was hanging on the foot of the cross was John. You know, a side note, I wonder if there's some indicators from John's life. I wonder if there's some things that we can glean into John's life that we could see that might help be able to teach us and enlighten us about how that we can live our lives for Jesus with the perspective from being at the foot of the cross. You know, for instance, where was Peter? Where was Peter that day? You know, we know that Peter wasn't at the foot of the cross. Peter had betrayed Jesus vehemently. 3 specific times he denied Jesus. You know, most believers would say that we want our lives to represent the gospel. We want our lives to imitate Jesus. I want my life to be about Jesus. I want to live for what he stood for, and I want to live for those same principles in my life. We can all agree that this is what we are, that this is what we're all after. We all want to be like Jesus. We can agree on that. And this is what we want. But if you think about all of the spontaneous challenges in our life, if you think about the times that we're not at church, we're not around our church friends, we're not close to God in the moment, and we have these spontaneous things that pop up in our lives, problems at work, issues with kids, financial challenges, just specific struggles that we're going through, how often do you turn to Jesus first? See, I think this is a lot about there was a lot of challenges going on during that time, and there was a lot of persecution happening, right? They just took away Jesus, and the followers were discouraged. They were depressed. A lot of them went back to go fishing. They went back to their hometowns. They didn't see it all the way through. And from a human perspective, you could say, well, I don't really blame them. But here we find John at the foot of the cross. And if we're honest, most of the time we too trust our own wisdom. We too rely on ourselves. We try to figure it out. We try to think, we think about it and we're like, I've got to handle this. I've got to do something. So what am I going to do? But here's our takeaway from this part. We must count the cost if we're going to live by the cross. We must count the cost. You got to look ahead and see. We must count the cost if we're going to live by the gospel. Because the cross by itself, it will not satisfy the desires of our flesh. We will not be just ultimately happy because of the cross. We're not going to, the cross doesn't go into the world and meet all of our worldly desires. You know, the world doesn't understand this. They say, what are you doing? What are you guys doing? You know, if you're going to save your marriage, you need to do something. You can't just trust in God. You need to do something. You got to go out and handle it. The world says, you know, if you're going to save your business, you better do more than pray. You better go do something. You know, they don't see the value in our connection to the cross. They don't see our connection to the Spirit. And we've got to trust in the things and the ways that Jesus taught us to live. The apostles, they all vowed their allegiance to Jesus, right? Yet where are they? Where are they? Peter did so more than all the others. He even made a bold statement. He said, even if everybody else leaves you, Lord, I never will. I'll be there. I'm going to be there no matter what. Wow. I mean, what a sensational moment, right? What a bold statement. I'm sure everybody else felt like, man, I wish I would have said that because what Peter said was so cool. I mean, it would probably get you a lot of likes on Facebook. It'd probably blow up your Instagram. It'd go viral. People would be retweeting this. Big flamboyant claims, right? Big speech. Yet where was he? Yet where was he? When the rubber met the road, everything that Peter said was just words. You know, so often we lived our lives based on the law and the ways of the world, right? The world, it works in a way that we compare ourselves to others. As long as I'm doing better than others, as long as I'm not making any big mistakes, then I must be good. You know, it justifies somebody based on a comparison with others. I mean, that's the way of the world. That's how the world treats us. Like, you're doing better than most. Good job. You know, hey, you graduated. That's fine. Now what? And, it doesn't really compare you to what the standard of the Bible is. People who are led by the law and the world's teachings, they're more obsessed with themselves than they are with the love of Jesus. Their own words, their own ideas, even their own vows. At this point in Peter's life, he was still pretty self-focused. Peter went off and he had a pity party. He was upset. And hopefully it was leading him to godly sorrow. But he was upset that he blew it, that he made all these mistakes. And we're left to kind of guess a little bit, but something must have kept him from the foot of the cross. But what we see in Paul's decision is completely different. He made the decision to know none of this. He made a decision to stay away from the world and all that he had learned, all of that wisdom, the different languages, all the things that he had been taught. He made a decision to know nothing but Jesus and His words. His ideas, His vows, such as, I will never leave you or forsake you. Jesus, He loved us first. What allowed John to come back and be with Jesus at the foot of the cross, even after his failings, even after all of the fear that had to be on John's mind? I mean, they just saw their teacher, their Lord, their rabbi, dragged away and crucified on the cross. They saw this brutality. There were people making claims that we're going to do this to all the Christians. What gave John the motivation to go back and sit with Jesus at the foot of the cross? John's mind was consumed with Jesus' love for him. It wasn't that John just loved Jesus. John was thinking about how much Jesus loved him. Throughout John's writings, we see how intimate John felt about Jesus. John was blown away by how Jesus loved him. He says this in 1 John 4:19, we love because He first loved us. In 1 John 4:10, he says, this is love. Not that we love God, but that He loved us and sent His Son as an atoning sacrifice for our sins. So, John understood that this isn't just about we need to love Jesus. But if we want to keep our minds pure, if we want to keep our minds focused on Jesus, if we want to keep being motivated and going towards the cross, we have to continue to remind ourselves that Jesus loved us first, that He loved us first. This enabled John to be there at the end of Jesus' earthly life. Where were all the others? Where was Peter? Peter was having a pity party at this point. He hadn't got it yet. He eventually got it. But at this point, he was still thinking through the ways of the world, not the ways of God. Struggling with his mistakes after making loud boasts, sensational boasts. You could imagine if you made a bold claim in front of all your friends and they all liked it on Instagram and Facebook and retweeted it, and then it didn't happen the way you thought it did, and you ended up leaving Jesus even after you said you wouldn't, you would feel a lot of remorse. And that probably kept him from being there. Again, I'm kind of reading into it a little bit. But John was there. John deserted Jesus as well. But yet here he is. And he writes about how deep his love was for Jesus, but primarily because Jesus loved him first. If you live by the law, you die by the law. If you live for the world, you're going to die in the world. If you live consumed with your love for God and your performance and your deeds and your devotions, then eventually you're going to find yourself too in a pity party away from the cross. You're going to find yourself questioning God, asking Him, God, why don't you answer my prayers? Why don't I feel connected to you? Because your mind isn't focused on the right things. John's love was a simple love. It wasn't based on prayers answered or things that Jesus has done for him. It was based on His love for me, that He absolutely loved me first, so therefore I love Him. None of us can make it to heaven without realizing, accepting, and surrendering ourselves to Jesus. We need to lay our hearts in the hands of Jesus. We need to lay down at the foot of the cross and stare at Jesus and love Him. We need to realize that He loved us first and that He showed us what love really is. When we recognize this, when we recognize that God's love is limitless, when we recognize that it's unconditional, when we realize that God's love cannot be defeated, that there is nothing that can overcome it, that God's love never fails. When we realize this, we too can be like Paul. This is why Paul made the decision. This is why Paul says, I have decided to let all of this other garbage go. Now, everybody else would have never said all that intelligence, all of his learning was garbage. But Paul says, I consider it nothing. It's of no value. It's rubbish. It's garbage. All I want to know amongst you is Jesus Christ and Him crucified. That's what Paul is saying, and that's why Paul made that decision. Paul's credentials, they would have stood up against the best of the best in any society. In any society. He was a genius, a true genius. By the very definition of the word, Paul was a genius. Knowledge, education, information, data, top of his class, the best of the best. He speaks multiple languages all on top of it. Paul could hang with any of the heavy hitters. He was brilliant. But Paul says in 1 Corinthians 2:2, I have made a decision. I'm going to spend the rest of my life, the rest of my time on this planet, not just furthering my knowledge, not, gaining more diplomas, building up my studies and my education. He says, no, I am going to obsess my life. I am going to consume myself with. I am going to focus on Jesus and Jesus on the cross. What Paul is saying is he's learned the most important thing. Out of all of his wisdom, out of all of the knowledge he's gained, he's learned the one thing that is more important than anything else. He has to focus on Jesus and what Jesus has done for him on the cross. Now, the great news for us is this is a great life hack. We don't have to go and learn 5 languages. We don't have to go and study and be a scholar of the Jewish traditions and of the Torah. We don't have to understand different societies. The life hack that Paul is giving us is, let me just narrow it all down. All you need to know is Jesus Christ and Him on the cross. That His love towards me is greater than anything else that I have ever known. You know, I have seen a lot of people come to God. As a minister for 20 years, I've watched a lot of people come to the faith. I hear them saying all the right things. I see them doing a lot of great things. I see them early in their Christian walk running really hard after Jesus. But after a while, you start seeing their fire fade. After a while, you start seeing their passion, their devotion, their sacrifice start slipping back into their old world, into their old self. You know, I've seen a lot of people that used to be on fire for Jesus completely lose their passion. All their serving, all of their talking about how great Jesus is, the next time you see them, they're barely hanging on. You know, this happens when we're not diving deep into understanding Jesus' love for us. This happens when we don't dive into understanding what He did for us on the cross. You know, I've seen a lot of Christians proudly talk about how long they've been a follower of Jesus. I hear people talking, I've been a follower for 40 years, 30 years, 25 years, 30 years, whatever. I hear people talking all kinds of crazy numbers. They tell stories about what they used to do for Jesus. They talk about how on fire they used to be, about sacrifices that they used to make. The problem here is all of it's in the past. The question I would have is, have you explored Jesus on the cross lately? Are you still motivated today like you were that day? Don't tell me about old stories. You got eternity in heaven to tell us stories. What are you doing today? I mean, how do we explain this? I used to do all this and this and this, and I'm walking by millions of people that are lost and going to hell, and I'm not doing anything. A complete disconnect from Jesus and the cross, who saw you lost and made a decision to go to the cross to die for you. You know, oftentimes we get caught up on the externals. Anything except for the act of love that Jesus demonstrated for us on the cross really is an external. We get caught up in talking about what's going on in the world, what's going on with our vacations, what's going on with the schools. Look, the world is a mess. The world is a mess. That doesn't excuse us or free us from responding, especially as disciples, to the cross of Christ. We need to make sure that we're connecting with Jesus. It's so easy we get caught up in the issues of the world. We get lost following earthly dreams and personal preferences. You know, we need to be near the cross. Going back to John 19 and 25, it says, near the cross of Jesus stood His mother's sister, Mary, and the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus saw His mother there, And the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, that's John, he said to her, "Woman, here is your son," and to the disciple, "Here is your mother." From that time on, this disciple took her into his home. John stood near the cross. Jesus loved John, and because of that, John learned to love others. When you see that you're at the foot of the cross, when you see Jesus hanging there in agony, when you see him struggling to gasp for air, when you see him bloodied, when you see him in excruciating pain and exhausted, when you're at the foot of the cross and he makes eye contact with you and he stares you right in the eyes, and you know what this man has gone through, you're not thinking about the externals anymore. All you can think about is it should have been me on that cross. It should have been me hanging there, suffering, dying, not this guy. He was innocent. He loved me. He sacrificed for me. And we carry that thought for a little while, but then as soon as we leave it, we're right back into our old nature, chasing our old sins, going right back into our addictions, not fighting, not cutting them off like God calls us to, not confessing them to our brothers and sisters because we didn't want to be around our brothers and sisters because that's time consuming. When you put things in perspective of the cross, all of our excuses, man, they're garbage. They're garbage. You see, when we're at the foot of the cross and we look at Jesus, we know that there was nothing Jesus did to deserve what he's going through. And if we're being really honest, we know that I've done everything to deserve to be on there in his place. See, if you take yourself away from the foot of the cross, your faith will not last. I'm going to tell you right now, if you lose gratitude for what Jesus did for you on the cross, your faith will die. You can have the best of intentions. You could be the most disciplined person in the world. You can have a great heart. You could be at church every Sunday. But if you lose your focus, if you lose your connection to what happened on the cross, you can no longer see yourself there. You can no longer be the disciple that Jesus has called you to be. Your faith cannot last. You may stay here. You may push on, but not as God desired it from the start. You may still do, but not with the same spirit and not with the same heart. If you see yourself at the foot of the cross, there's nothing you won't do for Jesus or for your neighbor, anyone else that walks on this planet. I fear that we have a lot of people in the world that will never connect to the cross. They're living in their own pity parties. They're blaming God for the way that their life has turned out. They're blaming God for their circumstances. Now, I also fear that we have a lot of disciples that have forgotten who they were called to be in Jesus. That there are a lot of those like they talk about in 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 5. They have a form of godliness, but they deny the power. There's a lot of people. The Bible says that the love of most will grow cold. Guys, we're talking about connecting to Jesus, not losing that connection. The only way we're going to make it to the end faithfully is to be like the psalmist that he says in Psalm 46:10. Be still and know that I am God. He's saying, be still. No matter what's going on, no matter how crazy the world is, guys, stay still. Focus on me. Stay connected to me. Stay connected. Stop the craziness. Wait. Sit. Rest. Rely. Trust. Be patient. Listen to. Don't run off and just act. When we do those things, we're acting like God. We are not God. We need to take off the crown. Take off the crown. We can't even fix our own marriages. We can't even fix our own issues in our lives. We need to rely on Jesus. We need to go to the foot of the cross and lay there and weep. We need to sit with Jesus. We need to count the cost of the gospel and understand that Jesus didn't just die so we have a form of religiosity. He didn't just die so that you used to be able to do great things. We got to get out of the house. We got to get off the couch. We got to get out of our comfort zone. We got to love people. Now, Paul said, I made a decision. I want you to make a decision today. Not for me, not for this church, for you and for him. Make a decision. Think about the decisions you made recently. Were they made with the perspective of the cross? Were they made thinking that this is going to help advance God's kingdom? Were they made on financial gains and what makes you comfortable and maybe fear? Are you thinking about Jesus or are you thinking about you? You know, John was there at the cross because Jesus loved him first. How often do you think about the ways that Jesus has loved you? Does your life reflect that same love that Jesus had for you? Who are you pouring into? Who are you surrendering to? Who are you dying for? You know, John, he stood near the cross. You know, you don't get close to Jesus by being far off. You don't get close to Jesus by doing your own thing, by just being and living by your own ways. If you're not close to Jesus, if you're not near Jesus, you got to get into His Word. You got to find out about this. Connect with people that are willing to show you. Are you doing what you need to do? It's on you. If you're watching us today, if you're with us out there, and you don't feel like you have a deep connection to Jesus and the cross, you got to make a decision. Right down there in the chat, just say, hey, look, I'm new, I need some help. Who wants to help me? Are you doing what you need to do to be close to Jesus? There is always something else to complain about. There is always something to have a pity party over. There is always something to grieve. There's always something that's going to be lost. But it doesn't have to be you. There is no place like the foot of the cross. I love you guys. To God be the glory. Amen.